you wouldn't mind get started and just tell us what's your career path been thus far?
Sure. So, hey guys, good morning. I'm so glad you could join. My name is XIAOLU, and I graduated from Georgetown in 2014 from the School of Foreign Service. At the time, I didn't really know anything about tech, didn't really think ahead about what industry I wanted to be a part of, but I started with on-campus recruiting. I recruited to be in sales at SAP, where I spent 5 years. And there I hopped around from sales to consulting. SAP also has an internal venture fund and startup incubator in SF that I worked for a while. And from there, after 5 years, I went and got my MBA from Wharton in Philly, which I graduated from just last year. And I stayed in tech, and right now I'm a senior product manager for mobile apps at Walmart. And I will say, I think some people, have an idea of what they want to do in their career. I really didn't. But I feel pretty fortunate to have found myself somewhere where I feel like the function fits me. I enjoy and am good at my job. And really, what more can you ask for? So happy to be here today and to talk more about that.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'm Danielle Martin. I currently work at AirBnB as a UX writer. I graduated from the college at Georgetown in 2010, right as the recession was happening. And I had an English major. And I was like, what am I going to do with this English major? Oh my God, I can't find any jobs. So I had been into like newspaper and obviously reading and things like that. And so I thought, okay, maybe I'll go try to work in publishing in New York. I think actually the gal who ran the Columbia publishing course, there's like this 6-week boot camp in New York. She had come to my journalism class at Georgetown. And so I was like, great, I'll try to go get into that. So I ended up in New York, did that publishing course, ended up at Penguin Books, doing kind of like publishing so old school. So it was like I was someone's assistant, I was answering the phones, like all that sort of stuff. But ultimately ended up doing like a lot of project management for websites and apps, which I think this is one of the lessons, is that almost every company has like a tech role these days. So even though I was in old school book publishing, I happened to find myself in this sort of techie design project management role. And so I did that for 4 years, like a variety of projects. And then simultaneously was like sick of making publishing salaries and living with 6 roommates in a loft in Brooklyn, whatever. Very fun. I highly recommend. But I was like, I got to get out of this city. So I moved back to Seattle, where I'm from originally, and was looking for more like tech jobs. Landed in like a marketing content strategy role at a startup, just like doing everything, like helping with the blog and social media and emails and just all sorts of marketing stuff. And then moved over. At the time, product content strategy was sort of a new role, just thinking about like the story and the user problems and what's the conversation and how do we write all the words for the product. So I was lucky that my startup had a team like this, moved into that, did that for a little while, then moved into product management, which is what XIAOLU does, because I was good at like storytelling and leading teams and things like that. And I did that for a couple more years. As you'll see a pattern, we're all over the place. And then decided, you know what, I actually love the design side so much. I want to come back to like the content, the design. And so I came back then to UX content strategy, AKA UX writing or content design. There's all sorts of names for it, but sort of a winding path. But like XIAOLU, like I love my job. I'm, paid well. I love my teammates, all that sort of stuff. So very happy in the end, but there were lots of moments along the way of like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Can I pay my rent? All that sort of stuff. So I'm sure you will go on a similar journey, maybe. All right, thanks.
Hi everyone, Sophia Srinivasan.
Oh no, did Sophia freeze for you all?
Froze for me, yeah.
Okay, Oh, and it looks like she left. Willis, do you want to go next and hopefully she'll come back?
Yeah, I can jump in. Willis Stebbins, he, him. I was a economics major in Georgetown College in 2013, and very similar to the first two stories, was approaching senior year, had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. A professor at the time, Father Walsh, who was a pretty big mentor to me, just directed me towards New York City. He said if I could handle New York City, then I could really, just like any city would pale in comparison, and I would feel comfortable going anywhere. So I started out in New York, working for a CEO advisory firm. But what we specialized in was corporate communications and reputation management. So a lot of customers, not necessarily the best companies out there, were experiencing kind of reputational threats, getting bad PR, they had made blunders, the CEOs had said things that they shouldn't have said, and we would kind of have to go in and clean up the mess. So it was really intense kind of PR work for the first 2 years of my career. Couldn't really plan on any sort of vacation because with the news and how things break, you could be called on at a moment's notice. And just like ultimately didn't want to continue doing that. While I loved kind of that industry, it just wasn't necessary for me. And I started advising and working for a lot of companies in the tech sector. So was very fortunate with that company to transfer to San Francisco, and just started to get a lot closer to these tech companies, see really how extremely well they treat their employees, how much they value their employees, and just like, I need to get into one of these companies. And that was an extremely huge benefit of the Georgetown Alumni Network, where there's a surprisingly large amount of Hoyas in tech companies. So when I first moved out here, knew a bunch of people from my class, and basically just took informational interviews with anyone I could. And that was primarily driven through Georgetown. And ultimately, I went to a smaller tech company called Quid for a year. I realized like at that time, like the super small startup life wasn't quite for me. I needed a little bit more structure, and I still felt like I had a lot to learn versus I'm going to go in there and build. I really wanted to learn first and then maybe jump to a smaller company. So I've been at Slack now for 4 years, and I mean, I still love it, which feels very lucky to say after that amount of time. And my role now is a customer success manager, which a lot of companies call a lot of different things. So it could be account management. It can be, some people call customer success. The team at other companies can really be customer support. So it really is very kind of company specific. But what I love about customer success at Slack is we are not customer support. We are kind of a strategic partner to our customers. So I help roll out Slack, and that's a lot of change management, communications. At the beginning, it's a little bit of like project management. And then afterwards, just kind of the nature of Slack is I just get to go in and work with different teams on how can we make your work and like your workflows more productive and efficient in Slack. So I basically just get to come in and be a value-added advisor to my customers. And I think we'll also get into this probably a little bit later on like the day of the life, but every day is different. I work extremely cross-functionally with a ton of different departments, almost nonstop. But yeah, that's where I am. Very similar to XIAOLU and Danielle. It zigzagged, had no idea. And I think one of the things and why I'm so happy to be here and do this webinar is Georgetown and the Alumni Network really helped me out when I was trying to break into tech. And everyone was just super generous with their time, would do informational interviews when I was just like looking at companies, trying to understand what a title and a role meant. I'm like, I don't even understand what this means or what they do. And if you see a Hoya on LinkedIn that works at a company you're looking at, I would say 95% of the time that person will take a call with you and kind of explain what their view of that role is and help you out. So that's my story. Sophia, back to you. I think we lost you right as you were starting.
No, I got to hear most of yours. Very interesting. So at what point did I cut out?
I think we could just start from the beginning.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I was just saying it's great to be back. I used to work at the Career Education Center when I was a student, so happy to be here. Also recognize some folks from another panel I was on, um, and happy to be part of this interesting group of panelists. I think what everyone said about zigzagging, trying different things, and then what Shalu said about not specifically looking out for tech in the beginning resonates with me a lot. I didn't want to work in tech at all when I graduated from the School of Foreign Service in 2015. I remember seeing a friend who was working at Facebook and specifically thinking, I'm so glad I'm not going there. But then I ended up working in tech in the end. So I wanted to work in the energy sector actually, because of an experience I had had working in Mongolia during its 2012 mining boom. I was interested in sustainable development and thought that might be a good way to go at it. So when I was a junior, I interned for BP in the UK. I had this idea I would see how the sausage is made. But at the time, the market crashed for oil and gas, so didn't get a job there afterwards. Looking back, I'm really glad I didn't start my career in oil and gas. That's what I wanted to do at the time. So I ended up working in economic consulting at Deloitte in New York, focused more on the finance side, M&A. And then after 2 years, through a Georgetown contact, I moved to S&P Global Ratings for their energy infrastructure team. I thought this is what I wanted to do. And then when I got there, I got a little sidetracked because I got involved with our sustainable finance team, working on smart cities and green transformations across the US, writing about that. And that kind of coincided with a time when Lyft had acquired City Bike, Capital Bike Share, all of those systems nationally, and they were hiring a lot for that new team. And I love cycling, so it was like the combination of many things at the same time, and I ended up getting a job there. I stayed there for about 2.5 years, ultimately leading their asset planning teams in a strategy and operations role. And now I'm actually doing a Master of Public Policy at LSE. I've been working for 6 years, and so just wanted to take an academic break.
Great. Thank you, everybody. I love the message about zigzag careers and not knowing what you want to do. And I hope you all the students here on this call, take that to heart. You have time, so be patient. Okay, well, the next question. So I know that your day changes and everything's different, every day. But if you could share, sort of some of the main tasks that you do in your role, also a sample, whether that's a sample project or a sample client might bring that to life a little bit more, that would be fabulous.
Awesome. So I'm going to start from scratch and assume that people don't know what product management is. Every time I talk to my parents, they're like, can you explain it a little more? So product management. So in tech, a product is essentially a bundle of technological features. So any tech application that you use, whether it's hardware or software. So let's take Zoom, for example. The buttons at the bottom, those are features, but it's part of a product that somebody owns. Somebody has decided that, the mute button should be at the bottom left, and that when you want to unmute, you can push the space bar and briefly unmute yourself. So these are all features that are part of a product. And overall, a product is a vehicle of value that you deliver to whoever your end customer is. I know that's like very vague, businessy way of describing it, but the way of thinking of it is that why do we build specific products and what informs the decisions that we make about them? There are several factors. So one is general company strategy. What is the purpose of Zoom or Facebook or Walmart or Google? What's their company strategy? And the second that informs that is, what are the market opportunities? So what are your competitors building? Do customers like it more? Should you build something similar or should you build something different? What's missing in the market and what's expected of you in the market? The third is a deep user empathy, right? So not just saying like, oh, this is what the market needs, but like specifically, you know, I'm looking at all these faces on Zoom and you are all Zoom users. Like I have to have, if I was managed Zoom, for example, I would have to have a deep understanding of how each of us uses Zoom, you know, what pain points we have, what our journey is when we log on and log off every day. What's the first thing we see? What's the next thing we see? Does it make sense? And the last thing that we have to consider is technical feasibility. So I know this panel is for non-technical roles in tech, and I certainly don't have a technical background, and not having a technical background, you can still do this part of the job where you understand and prioritize based on the technical feasibility of what a product can do, because you have engineers who help you. But it's your job to amalgamate all of those factors to understand what are the next features that you release, what are enhancements that you put on top of existing features and why. And ultimately, your job is not to, you know, make a button or pick a color for a circle, but it's to drive a business outcome. So what is the intent of your feature? Is it to make sure users use your product more often, or they leave less soon, or they're happier with it, or is, you know, and that's where the business side comes in, is it's very helpful to quantify your outcome in a dollar amount, right? And so all of those things and feed into the day-to-day activity of what I do. You know, it's early in the year right now. So my product, so I own a mobile application within the Walmart portfolio. And right now we're trying to decide what this year looks like. So we're doing a lot of research, we're doing a lot of workshops to understand, you know, what are the main things, main business outcomes that we're driving towards this year, and what are the bets we want to make on certain features that we want to put into our roadmap to build. Once we have determined that roadmap and understood the business outcomes we're driving, then it's time to execute. And what that looks like week to week is I work with a team of engineers, a team of UX designers like Danielle, to visualize and design the product and then implement it technically. And then we have to, you know, and that is no small feat. And then we have to essentially launch it to make sure that our users use it. And then we have to measure the outcomes of whether that was successful. So that's kind of anywhere from like an 8 to 16 months view of what the role looks like. And from a day-to-day perspective, it's a lot of working sessions. You know, my day is filled with a lot of meetings because, you know, I don't work in a silo. I have to be on the phone with my designer, and we're constantly workshopping and taking ideas to engineering and getting feedback from our operations partners. And I would say, you know, at least 50% of my day is meetings. And then outside of that, a huge part of what I do is communicating and keeping the team on track, both through documentation and through like active communication. And then asking for help, making sure that leadership is aligned, and making sure that, you know, any decision that we make, we bring all of our stakeholders with us. I think right now there's this sort of trendy term for saying like, oh, a product manager is the CEO of a product. And that would be true if the CEO didn't have any, you know, any actual not responsibility. What's the word I'm looking for? Authority. Yeah. If the CEO didn't actually have any authority. I mean, I can't fire people, right? I can't promote people. People don't have to listen to me. But ultimately, I suppose I am responsible for the outcome. And I think this role, if it's something you're interested in, it's very helpful to understand just how much of it is talking to people every day, stakeholder management. But it is fun. And, I think don't be intimidated by the fact that there is a technical component. You don't need a technical background to do this job.
That was such a good description, y'all. Like, I can already tell you're an amazing PM. So yeah, that was beautifully done and makes my job easier because like she said, I work with product managers. And so I'm going to cobble onto your Zoom example because that was a great one. So I'm a UX writer on a design team at Airbnb. So I work with, and depending on the size of your company, you might not even have UX writers. Like it's very common to have a UX designer, but maybe not a writer. So just for whatever that's worth. But so I would work on a team like with XIAOLU and also a UX researcher, maybe if we're lucky, we get our own researcher, a designer, usually for sure. And we all work together on like trying to solve those problems that XIAOLU mentioned. So for example, you might come to me and say, we found that desktop users are pretty happy with Zoom. They're using it well. They're answering the survey at the end that it was easy to use. Things are working. But for some reason on mobile, it's just like trickier to use. And even people who use it all the time on desktop, they're canceling out of it on their phone and then joining desktop and said they can't find the buttons. Like we think there's something going on here that we could improve the design of. So then I might work with the designer and the researcher to say, okay, let's start with some like user interviews and watch people use this and really get a better understanding of those pain points, both what they say is annoying and also what they're doing. Like they can't find the button. Oh, okay. They don't even realize they can't find it, but we can see that they don't know where that is, So stuff like that. Then we would work with XIAOLU to say, okay, well, here are the top problems we observed. Can you help us prioritize these based on all the things you know about company strategy and metrics and what our goals are and all these sorts of things? And then we would go off and like design a new solution to this. Then maybe we would prototype that, test it out with users, say, yep, we think that this does these jobs and will help us hit these goals and that, and then work with engineering on different trade-offs. And again, just to echo, like I literally mostly took like literature courses at Georgetown, and I still was a product manager. I still work with engineers all the time. I think it actually can sometimes be good because you just ask the obvious question. You say like, is there a simpler way? Is there a faster way? Well, what if we did this? Like, are there any other options you can think of? And you don't just jump to conclusions thinking, oh, I know better because I also have a technical background. So anyways, we might have those trade-off discussions like, okay, well, we really wanted this animation, but that's going to take a couple weeks. So we can ditch the animation and just use this instead. And so a lot of that goes on. And then really where like the UX writing comes into my job is like, then I go write all the words too. So like every button you see on Zoom here, they all have words that someone chose those words, whether it was a writer or not. I work with localization to say, oh, record, I mean, that's not a great example, but that's confusing it went for our translators. So if there's a different English word, that'll actually localize better around the world. I also work on the accessibility content. So if you are a low vision user or you have mobility issues, maybe you use a screen reader to read out all these commands to you. And so I write all those words of like, what should this say when the user is like selected on that? And then, so it's a lot of that sort of stuff. So like very sort of like just a very complimentary role, I would say, to XIAOLU's. And I'm trying to think what else. Oh, and there's other things just like working with legal on, is there anything legally risky about these words? I'm meeting with legal later today about a project. And so all that sort of stuff. So I'll pause there, but just a lot of variety, a lot of like research and writing and design and working with PMs and operations and all that. So I love it. All right, over to you, Sophia.
Thank you. Yeah, I would echo what XIAOLU and Danielle said about a lot of variety, working with a lot of different teams. Definitely what I experienced. So I was a strategy and operations manager at Lyft's transit bikes and scooters division. And so strategy and operations, I would say, is a little bit different at every tech company, but I think the unifying theme is that you're working at the center, and you are collaborating with different teams. So these are called your cross-functional partners. And you're doing some analysis that has some type of quantitative component as well. And your goal is to help the company grow in an efficient way. So what I was doing was leading our asset planning. And what that means is Lyft is a pretty software heavy company in the rideshare space. So bikes and scooters was pretty much almost all of its capital expenditures every year. So all of the physical assets we bought. So if you're in DC, you could see that in the bicycles themselves, or the stations that they dock into. And so my job was to figure out how many of these bikes, stations, scooters, and other large pieces of equipment, how many do we need for the year and beyond? Which cities do we put them in? And we may be trying to roll out different types of technology. So we had product managers like XIAOLU on the hardware side coming up with new electric bike technology, new products that we were trying to roll out. How does that plan fit into our plan to deploy all of these vehicles around the US? Do we have the budget for it? So working with finance on that. How do we get all of the parts to get everything built? So collaborating with the supply chain team on that. And then how does this fit in with our commitments to our city partners? So that's the policy team and sponsors, for example, Citibank in New York City, which is handled by our business development team. And then how does this align with our overall strategy? And so because we were so small, we didn't have really a strategy team. So that's sort of like collectively just working with everyone on that, interacting a bit with our chief of staff who works directly with the head of our division. And so my job was to kind of be at the center of this maze. And then as the COVID-19 pandemic was giving all kinds of issues to the bicycle supply chain, it was crazy. You may have tried to buy a bike and found it difficult. So right now, you can't order a bike commercially on the Lyft side, at least. It'll take a year and a half to get some of our equipment. That's how backed up the supply chain is. So kind of amidst this maze, my job was to figure it out and make recommendations to our executives on what we should do. So what this kind of translated to day to day was a lot of meetings. Usually it's always hybrid, in person and video conference. A lot of time on Slack. So I'm excited to meet someone who works there. And so I would say meetings with cross-functional partners, maybe 50% of my day, and then 15% maybe working on Excel or something to analyze the financial implications, operational implications of what's going on. And then 30% maybe emails or meetings to brief executives, either alone or with the partners I was working with, to make recommendations on what we should do. And then, of course, 5% just interacting with my colleagues. Lyft is a very, I think, collegial company, so that was a plus. And so I think just to give you an example of some of the things I would do on any given day, again, echo what Danielle said about the variety. Like I could be talking with our design team to see is it okay to use these bikes in Portland because we need this specific color of orange paint to go with our sponsor Nike, and this other paint that's not available. Like if we don't have it, it's going to be a problem. And then talking to a product manager about our new pickup drop-off software for picking up the bikes after someone uses them, and how does that affect operational efficiency, and what does that mean for how many of these we need to order. And then talking to the policy team because the city of DC has this 5-year plan where they're going to roll out e-bikes and they want our new e-bike, but we don't think it's going to be ready in time. So what do we do? And then helping the finance team draft an email to Lyft's old CFO, I guess he left, Brian Roberts, to say, hey, Brian, we need to spend like $5 million on all of this. Can you approve that? Thanks. Yeah, so very, very varied, I think.
All right, I'll go next and do my best to describe customer success. I think an analogy that I heard kind of early on in my time in this function, in this role, is I think it's helpful to think about it as account management, and that's what non-tech companies will call customer success. So the example that I heard when I was starting out was just think of like a hotel chain like Marriott, and every time you go in there, you're going to see a Samsung TV. someone at Samsung is managing that relationship and ensuring every single time Marriott builds a new hotel, they're buying Samsung TVs for that. So customer success is just the tech kind of term for account management. We and this is important when you're doing your kind of due diligence about if you're applying to a customer success role in an organization, where does this team actually report up into? I think the very standard customer success should report into sales. So we're in a revenue generating department, and you should be carrying some sort of quota in terms of your goal. The salesperson, sales obviously goes through the selling motion, closes the deal, and then it is passed to a customer success manager where initially you're tasked with rolling out the technology, ensuring adoption and usage, but ultimately not just adoption. Like a buyer is not just buying a piece of software to look at how many people log into the tool. They're buying it because it replaces a system or a process and it's making it better to deliver value for the business. And that's kind of the main role of a CSM after initial adoption, which is a little bit of product management. Working with Slack, it's usually passed to an IT project management team where we do a bunch of due diligence about all the policies and permissions and where their data gets stored. And we just kind of check a lot of boxes that is very tactical in nature. And then afterwards, it is all about ensuring that this piece of software is adding value to the business. And sometimes that's very straightforward. Slack was actually acquired by Salesforce. So just for an example, this is Salesforce has the Sales Cloud that they sell, and they roll it out to an organization, and that should make all of their sales reps more productive and generate more business more revenue for the business. Very kind of straightforward, easy to quantify. At Slack, we're a productivity tool that's supposed to increase efficiency across the organization, improve organizational agility and alignment, which that was just like 6 or 7 buzzwords and kind of fluffy terms where you go into a meeting. And ultimately, my job is to ensure that these customers continue to pay Slack for our business. So that's my main role. I have a book of accounts. This can vary dramatically from company to company. At some software companies, a customer success manager can manage 50 to 100, and that's very programmatic and tech focused, tech heavy in terms of like your processes, where you're just trying to cover as many customers as possible. I feel very fortunate at Slack where we have what we call our high touch customer success team. So I have a dedicated book of accounts or a book of customers that have ranged from 6 to 10 at a time. And I'm responsible for really getting to know all of the executives in IT, and if I'm doing my job well in all these other departments, and knowing what like their business priorities are and what the friction is in their current processes and how Slack might be able to help that. So that's the ultimate goal to, I think it's very similar to my first job in PR, where it's just like all about telling a story, telling a narrative, like the narrative that you bring to the table, especially in sales, of why is this tool valuable? Why should you renew? Why should you keep paying for this tool? And I think particularly at Slack, that's of major importance because we have a competitor that happens to give away a competing product for free. So convincing people that they need to continue to spend hundreds of thousands, if not $1 million a year with us can sometimes be a pretty big task. So outside of like my main responsibility is ensuring what we call a renewal. So a customer pays us for a year-long license. Sometimes that can be longer. Ensuring that when that contract comes up, it's almost like a non-discussion. We're going to keep paying Slack to use their tool and to prevent churn. Like when a customer stops paying for a service, and that's a very heavily tracked metric in the market for a lot of B2B business-to-business software firms. But outside of that, kind of after I roll it out is when I think it gets like really, really fun. A lot of times my day will involve like working with someone like XIAOLU in the PM team, where just like the features that Slack ships, PMs are really interested in like how are they being received by a customer? What are the customer concerns or complaints? Or with particularly COVID, I think everyone here said they spend a ton of time in meetings, and no one, when you're in college or the age that you are, like dream of spending a career in 9 to 5 meetings all day long. And I think with the pandemic, a lot of things went from in person to just completely moving that to virtual, but we didn't actually think about whether there's a better way to work. And so Slack has been shipping a lot of features where there's these things called clips where it's kind of like Instagram stories, or I think every software company probably has this feature now, but rather than spending 30 minutes in a stand-up meeting where everyone gives like a 2-minute update and that's the only relevant portion of the meeting for you, you can just record a clip, send it in a channel asynchronously. And so we try to think about, the product team has been shipping a lot of new features in that space, but with that comes a lot of questions from our customers. One of these is a feature that's audio only communication. We're trying to address Zoom fatigue. A lot of our customers were really upset about that. It's like our employees already have too many options for calls. Like we don't want to introduce another feature. This is just more unnecessary change management. We already have Zoom. We don't want to direct users in another way. So a lot of times you're like fighting these battles, and again, telling the story of why this is a better feature. We're not trying to, or not necessarily, we're not trying to replace Zoom. This is for like quick, spontaneous conversations. Like you are the face of sometimes the PMs, they've gone through, done a pilot, talked to customers, but when it rolls out, generally, the CSMs are usually the first people there explaining it, having to answer Q&As, do due diligence on where does this data get stored, who can access this feature, especially with communication. HR comes in and legal about, oh, you're allowing people to record clips. Well, do you have any like software that scans for potentially like sensitive words? How do people report sexual harassment? There's just a lot of things that you got to start to think about, and a lot of times CSMs are delivering that. What else? And then a lot of my day is just meeting with customers. Again, at the beginning of, now that we're at the beginning of the year, a lot of my IT teams that I partner with are doing their planning. They're aligning on what their objectives and priorities are. And I just try to make sure that I understand those. So when I bring up potential lines of work that we can do, making sure it aligns with what they actually care about. And I think that's taken me a decent number of years to really figure out how to do that correctly. What else? Yeah, it varies day to day. I think with customer success, it's sometimes you can have your whole day planned out and a customer reaches out with an emergency, or all of a sudden like an unexpected risk pops up and it can totally throw your day off. So I'm sure like everyone on this call, it's constant battle of like, what do I prioritize? I just don't have enough time in the day.
Thank you so much. You four did like one of the best jobs in terms of describing your day-to-day. So thank you so much. And I also like that many of you used questions, that you're kind of, you're getting on a daily basis. So I want those who are attending to think about those questions. Are those questions curious, for you? Or what other kinds of questions are you interested in? You could always put something in the chat in terms of that or a skill set. And I'm sure these panelists would also be happy to help where you might fit into tech. Based on that. So think about your curiosities, as it relates to products and companies. Okay, so great. So let's do a really quick round with this so that we can open it up to questions. What advice would you give to students that are trying to secure a job or internship in the tech industry, keeping in mind that some of these students also might not ever have been in the tech industry, so it's a matter of breaking through as well. So if you could answer that in just like one minute, 1 to 2 minutes, that'd be great.
Oh, you're on mute, XIAOLU. Yeah.
I'm on mute. My advice for any industry, not just tech, is to understand what your exit opportunities are. I think what I have no regrets about what I actually did with my career, but what I regret in my decision-making process was not understanding what my exit opportunities are. And what I mean by that is I see a lot of my peers and friends from college who have done a job for 4 years before they realize that they hate it. And then they look up and they go, I wonder what I can do next. And that is a really scary and uncomfortable position to be in. And the good news is, you're never truly stuck. You can always do something else. But the way you mitigate that heartache and the headache is, let's say you want to do PM, you think you'll like it and you'll be good at it. Before you accept an offer, reach out to, make a goal, reach out to 10 Georgetown alumni, and probably you'll be able to talk to 5 to 7 of them and ask them, what do you want to do next? What are your colleagues exiting to? And if you're not comfortable with what people are doing next after that job, I would reconsider taking it. And I didn't have that view when I took my first role, and I figured it out. It's okay. But I certainly have that view now of taking a long view, taking a not this job, but the job after that and the job after that view, and making sure that along the way, you feel comfortable with the general direction of where that path leads you.
Interesting. Just advice for getting the first job. I think my advice is close to what Willis was saying at the very beginning of this, is just cold call everybody you can get your hands on. And this goes for any time in your career. People are so happy to talk to you if you just reach out on LinkedIn and say, hey, I'm a student at Georgetown, I'm curious about this role, would you be up for a 20-minute Zoom call with me or coffee chat when we're back in real life, things like that. I really wish I had done more of that. I feel like I did almost none of that in college, which is just insane to me now. But I was nervous. I was well, people are busy, blah, blah, blah. That's all in your head. People love to talk to you. They love to help each other. And so, yeah, just reach out to lots of people. You're already doing a great job being on this, or being here at this panel, just hearing about different jobs. So those would be my tip top advice, is that, and that is also how you will get most jobs too. So just making all those connections that then will serve you for a long time. And then the other thing is just it's a little bit different to what Shayu just said, but in the same vein a little bit, is pay attention to what activities give you energy and take away your energy. That is how I've always sort of known when I want to go into my next role, is oh, I'm really enjoying this and I feel really energized by this, versus for me, when I'm deep in spreadsheets and auditing data and things like that, I am just so drained that I literally can fall asleep. So versus I actually love being in meetings. I love doing stuff like this. I'm real extrovert energy here. So yeah, just think about that in your classes and your assignments, in just your day-to-day, what activities really you feel good and energized by, and what are really draining. And that'll sort of help you go in the right direction of a role that could be a really good fit.
So my advice is for anyone who's interested in early to mid-stage startup, which is what the team I was on was. It's kind of a smaller startup within a larger one at Lyft. And so this is to understand the ecosystem that you're entering and give yourself lots of options within that. And so what I mean by that is I would recommend interviewing with multiple early to mid-stage startups within the same space, so that you can understand what each one is offering and how they kind of work together, because each one will have strengths and weaknesses. It'll also help you negotiate your salary, but it helps you learn more about the space. And you can almost pick the winning horse, because not everyone's going to win by the end, which could be as soon as a year from now. So an example I can give is I interviewed at different micromobility startups, and I chose Lyft because of their strong city partnerships, which I thought would be the defining successful factor. Luckily, I was right. And the other ones, a lot of people got laid off, things folded. I was lucky this time. Who knows about next time? So that's one thing. And then it also gives you options, because in a lot of smaller startups, there may not be a path to just vertically grow within your company. And so you may want to jump teams or jump companies to grow. So that gives you options. Also, just as a quick side note, I don't know if this applies to most people here, because a lot of these roles require experience, and the role that does not require experience needs to be filled by March. But a contact at Lyft on the City Bike team, for their team that sets up stations. So these are the stations you see for Capital Bike Share. it's the physical infrastructure throughout New York City. They're hiring for 3 roles. So I'll post them in the chat. Feel free to get in touch with me about it after this on LinkedIn. I'll put in my details as well.
Yeah, I think to reiterate what I said earlier, leveraging your network as much as possible, primarily for informational interviews. I think one mistake that I did have was this company before Slack that I went to. I didn't know anyone who worked there, and and I learned that in the interview process, where I thought it was like 100% me pitching myself to the company and why they should hire me. It's 50-50, where it's also the company pitching you on why you should come work here. And a lot of it was a little bit more marketing than I would have hoped. And I joined this company. It's like, oh, I kind of get out of here. Where I just wish I just like talked to people informationally about the culture, how they like working there, asking them how long like the average tenure of these employees are. I think that's probably a little bit more important for smaller startups. And then for me, particularly like jumping, I did the corporate communications role for 4 years, and then switching into tech. I just like read the news as much as possible. Outlets like the information I think is kind of expensive, so maybe not that one. Maybe they offer student discounting, but the information does a ton of good reporting. Wired, Fast Company, the Wall Street Journal does the CIO Journal that covers a lot of tech themes. Just kind of reading, and you just kind of start to pick up on what matters to companies, being able to kind of speak that language. I think that's what informational interviews really help with too. I just remember taking one with a PMM, and I was like, I don't really understand what you do and like what this is, or sorry, a product marketing manager, which is a abbreviated PMM. And that just like really started to help me whittle down like what the roles were that I thought I had relevant experience with. And I think one of the questions that came in here on like, how do you sell your non-tech skill set into tech? And that all these informational interviews helped me whittle down, like I didn't know what customer success was, but once I started to talk to people of, you basically own a book of business, you're client facing or customer facing. A lot of times, like you deal with unhappy customers, you kind of need to change the narrative. I'm like, that's what I did all the time in PR. Like I'm good under stress. Like I write a lot, professional, or like in communications, like professional writing was a skill I developed. And I think that serves me really, really well in this role too. And I think regardless of where you start, I think being able to write and communicate well can't be overemphasized as an important skill set. Like you quickly pick up people who don't have that. And I think it is a very big differentiator.
Great, thank you so much. So we've got some really good questions in the chat. Elise, I just want to quick say, for those of you who aren't on my tech and analytics newsletter, I recommend doing that. You can just Google industry newsletters Collie and you can sign up. And in there, I share a lot of non-tech internships. Perhaps this question is, for your company specifically. So if any of you if you know that you hire interns, maybe you could just put that in the chat. Yes, our company does, kind of thing. But for all the students, there's lots and lots of non-tech internship opportunities, and you can sign up for my newsletter and see some, and you can also see them on Handshake. So to start at the top, what are some type of non-technical skills that you suggest they use to market themselves for these positions? And just jump in, whomever.
Sorry, say that one more time. I was reading the chat.
Are there any specific non-technical skills you recommend students market?
Oh, gotcha. I mean, I think early in your career and at any point, like just communicating with others, collaborating with others, that's always going to be really important. I think just like problem solving, the book Grit is also a good one, of just like, yeah, I don't know that yet, but I'm a really fast learner. I love learning new skills. Like that is honestly like your first 5-10 years out of college. It's like all about that, of just like learning new things, being open, being flexible. So yeah, I feel like those are some good ones. Anybody else want to chime in?
I think it's similar, but I think just being able to build relationships with all different kinds of people, especially at all levels, like across, above, and below, is important. Um, I think I was definitely this way, but I focused so much on producing high quality work. And I think that's helpful up to a certain point. But after a certain point, it's kind of diminishing returns and you'll burn yourself out just trying to create value that way and secure your own position. It's important to build relationships.
I would say the best way to get a first round interview is through networking. A lot of, like, even when I was looking for jobs last year, like, it's so easy for your resume to get lost in the bot sorting pile. And I think the most consistent way to get a first round interview is by having an internal referral. And then once you get in there, you can better elaborate on the non-technical skills that you bring to the table, because everybody can say like, oh, I work well with others or I manage relationships, but I think that's best displayed in an interview one-on-one.
Fabulous. Yeah, so definitely a lot of internal referrals and networking. Danielle is also agreeing with you on that. And then thank you, Willis. He put a great interview guide as well in the chat. Another question is, what kind of skills did you develop early on in your career? So I guess once you started your career path, like what are some things that you built during that time and that has helped you since?
I would say writing and communicating to different audiences. So I did this in consulting, but one thing was if you write an email to like a client or a partner, it's typically you need to be much more high level, focus on what's important to them, whereas you might go in at a much more detailed level to someone you're working with on the project more directly. It seems like common sense, but I think it's actually much harder to learn how to do in practice.
Yeah, I think the soft skills are super important. How you present yourself on calls, how you manage conflict. Like there will always be conflict in a productive working environment. And how do you manage that in a productive way that doesn't affect relationships? I think, and by the way, those are skills that you can work on at Georgetown, because you're probably in clubs and you probably have leadership experience in clubs. And those are skills that you develop and can talk about in your interviews, even as an undergrad.
Great. We have another question. Somebody who, has noticed that many of you didn't start out right away in these career paths. So is there any downside to, right away going for product manager type roles? Anything that they should keep in mind if right now they're just going to start pursuing that right after college?
I would say product is a little competitive. And so a lot of people I know from product, including myself, did not start in product. If you manage to land a product role, like that's great. I can't think of any downside that doesn't also inherently exist with any role that you would take. But I would also say, like, there's a lot of getting into tech and then doing a functional shift or a role shift laterally, because as soon as you get into one of these roles, you're working with, like everyone has said, you're working with designers and researchers and salespeople and ops, and you can be like, oh, I like their job. And if you do a good job at your role and you develop big relationships with that team, you can make functional shifts. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think that's like totally expected that whatever your first job is probably going to not be your current job. So yeah, those internal shifts are so helpful. All the just experiences you gain in every role you're in, including, like I said, like what parts of this role do I like? What parts of this role do I not like? Those all help you get to the next place. So know that it is like a winding journey, and that's okay. Like as long as you're like learning and growing. And even like I've had jobs that I absolutely hated and I like almost had like breakdowns over, and those helped me a ton because that's how I knew I wanted to like switch and knew what roles and projects and teams to stay away from. So those are also really valuable experiences, even if they feel really yucky at the time.
Yeah, I would be interested to see it or hear if the rest of the panelists agree with me. I think it's also, it's interesting to take in like where the company is in its evolution, like what size of the company. Large companies like Salesforce, Walmart, Airbnb, Lyft. I've found that like the more later stage a company gets, a lot of these recruiting managers are going to just look for someone who checks 10 out of 10 boxes, have all the relevant experience. But they will have entry-level positions where they like build you in a specific role. Earlier startups, smaller startups really look for someone who just wants to hustle. You probably get hired for a role, but then end up doing like 3 or 4 different functions. So startups, you can get a really broad depth of experience kind of doing a number of different things, where if you join probably a bigger company, the swim lanes are a little bit more narrow. You have a little bit more prescribed run book of what you're expected to do. So I take that into consideration as well.
All great advice. Oh, you have one more thing, Danielle?
Yeah, I was just gonna +1 that and also say that like similarly, almost every role, there's like such a range of what you can actually do in that role, and no 2 people will do the role in the same way. So like there are some writers who just love to go sit in a coffee shop and write by themselves or whatever. There's others who like I prefer, I'm like, I'm gonna go talk to my customer success managers, and I'm gonna go talk to my customer support people or my sales people and learn all the pain points, and then I'm gonna write, so like you can do what there's such a range. You can make any role your own. So just know that no matter what you're hired as, like you can still flex it and move it into what you enjoy.
Great, thank you so much. One last quick question. What do you recommend for international students in your industries?
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, first, just know you bring so much to the table. Like so much of my job, Airbnb is in 196 countries. So much of my job is thinking about what does our global audience need? Like 85% of our users do not speak English as a first language. And so I have people on my team who English is not their first language. And that is so valuable because they more naturally think of what is the better way to say this for a global audience. So you're bringing a ton to the table. A lot of these big tech companies will have legal teams that will help you with visas and help you with all that sort of stuff. So but you might have to be more targeted in what jobs you seek out so that you do have that support, because unfortunately visas and green cards and things are a reality of this. So yeah, I think that is probably my best advice on that. And my husband's Australian. We've done all the green card stuff, whatever, like feel free to hit me up if you need to like talk about legal thing. I'm not a lawyer. I can't give legal advice, but I've done a lot of DIY searching and used to work at a legal startup. So anyway, it is tricky and challenging, but you bring a ton to the table.
Danielle, I feel like you've done everything.
Done it all, folks. Yeah, and you can too. Yeah.